Get your Bible out. I invite you to join me over in 1 Samuel today. 1 Samuel today. We are going to continue our series called Pressure Cooker. And sometimes, especially in these times, it feels like we are living in a pressure cooker. Pressure is rising, emotions are rising, everybody's blowing up on everybody else, and here's the problem. Everybody gets burned. And so the hope and the prayer through this series is we can be equipped and enabled to be able to withstand the pressure cooker, to learn how not to get burned and not to burn other people when it comes to these very volatile kinds of emotions that we have. Today, we're going to talk about envy. And that is a problem that we all face from time to time, and we deal with it from time to time. Envy is defined like this. Envy is an emotion which occurs when a person lacks another's superior quality, achievement, or possession, and either desires it or wishes that the other lacked it. And that is envy in a nutshell. We're going to talk a little bit more about envy and how some other people may have defined it. But envy, at its core, is this feeling that we have, I want what you have, and if that were all that it did, it might be a little more acceptable. But it's not. Envy continues to move forward. I want what you have. I want what you have. Not that I want something like it. Not that I want to just get something sort of like it. I want what you have. And the evil part behind it is I want what you have, and I don't want you to have it anymore. And it's this idea of envy that just is just getting so many of us, and we get worked up into this pressure cooker, and we're going to blow in a negative way. And we're going to see how King Saul did that and what happened as a result of that. And as we work toward that scripture in 1 Samuel chapter 18, I want us to understand the reality of envy. When we have this emotion, what do we get envious about? I mean, we could take a poll, but here's the top many things that we all deal with. And maybe none of these you're dealing with, and you may have something else totally different. Write that on your notes and say, hey, preacher missed it on these 7, but this one right here, man, I'm really struggling with this one. You know, that's okay. Let's just recognize the envy that we are dealing with. Maybe it's money. And that is such a volatile thing right now because you've got some that are working, some that aren't working, some that got laid off, some that were considered essential and got to keep working. We have all of this going on. So now we are in this moment of frustration, and we call it frustration, don't we? Because that's the good Baptist term. I'm just frustrated. No, you got one of the 7 deadlies going on, and that's envy. You're possibly, now you may be angry, and you know that may be what you're feeling. FBCCrowley.org, go find last week's message, and you can revisit that one. But envy is this sense of I'm frustrated, and it may be over money. Why do they have it and I don't? What is it? Why do they have it and I don't? You know what? We grew up together. And you know what? We went to the same school. We did all the same. How come they have it and I don't? And the devil wants to work us over in these ways. He wants you to compare your life to somebody else's life. And he wants you to get your eyes off of God and onto yourself and specifically onto others and say, you know what? We're the same. Why are you different? Why do you have more than me? Why do you have it better than me? I don't understand. And then envy begins to settle in. Money is a large problem when it comes to envy because we all have the things that we envy about that because it plays out in plays out in cars and houses and vacations and toys and all this other stuff. And we can easily get envious about that. We may not know what other sacrifices have been made in that home to acquire this other thing. You don't know that. All we see is the outside, and in this day and time, as wrong as it is, whatever you perceive apparently is reality. And that's not reality. But that's the world we live in, that what we perceive, well, that's reality. Not necessarily. And we've got to be careful. And maybe it's not money. Maybe it's a sense of relationship status. You know, both sides have an envy here. One side may envy, hey, oh, you know, you have a relationship and I don't. And, you know, that really stinks for me. And we can get real envious of that. Well, there's another side of that, and that is, I have a relationship and you don't. And, man, I'm real envious of the freedom you have. You know, you can play both sides of that. It just depends on what you're feeling and how your emotions are driving at that particular moment. You know, and that's part of what we deal with. Another big thing that I see people having envy about are those that were able to have children and those that weren't. These are two groups that become very envious, specifically groups that are trying to have a child, and they have all these friends that have kids, and they're struggling with that, and it's frustrating for them, and they begin to envy the other side. Of course, those with toddlers in the home may look at the ones who have no children and go, I remember those days. I'd like to have those days back. But, you know, we don't. But we do, kind of, you know, sometimes. You know, and I've got one that's going off to college in 32 days. And, you know, he's gone off to college. And it's like, I really wish I could have, but I don't. You know, and you can want that, but you don't need to let that override you in that way. Maybe it is attractiveness or a sense of luck. How come it seems like things always go that person's way and nothing ever seems to go my way? How come if I didn't have bad luck, I'd have no luck at all, kind of thing? And we get real envious because we see friends or neighbors or other people in our family, and it's just like, why them? And sometimes we'll go, why them? And we get really frustrated. That turns to envy because we want what they have. And we're going to talk about why we think that in just a second. Maybe it's weight. And this has been a personal struggle of mine for a lot of years in my life, is that of being overweight or wanting to be less weight than you are. And that's besides what the doctor may tell you. You know, I've gotten to where now I have an annual disgusting moment in my life. And that's when I go see my doctor for the annual physical, because every year it's like, you said you were going to lose weight. I'm like, dude, I'm trying, man. But the reality is, there are many people that, you know, how come they can eat whatever they want, and if I eat 2 bites, it's just like, you know, you know, and you see these, and you begin to get envious, and you want what they have, and that can become destructive for you. Learning to be content in your own skin, in your own place in life, in your own moment in time is something that we have to work toward, and that is one of the things we're going to talk about here in just a second. Maybe it's success in careers. You started at the same time as somebody else, and they've gotten promotions that you haven't, and you're like, why? I don't understand. How come that happened to them and not to me? And you begin to sabotage them, and you begin to run them down. Or how come they got voted into this position and I didn't? And so you begin to want to do something to get that position from them so it can be on you. And it can turn negative really quick. Now, hear me out. To want what they have in and of itself may not be wrong, especially if, somebody has this car. I want that car. Well, I can go down to the dealership and get that car. Envy begins to tease you, begins to control you. I want that car. And maybe you started out saying, I want a car like that. Well, I'd love to have something like that. And then if you let it sit long enough, it turns into, I want that car. I don't want any other car. And then we begin to obsess over it. This is what envy does, is it sits into us and settles into our heart and our life and our mind. That it now is, I want that car, and then all manner of evil can begin to play out in your mind. You know, social media is really a big problem when it comes to envy, because look at the life that person has. Well, I'd like to have that life. You know, you see all the pictures and you see all the posts, you see all the different feeds, and you're like, man, they have a great life. I'd like to have that life. The problem is you don't know what life they have in between what they post. Okay? You don't know the life they have in between it. And what can happen is the devil can play on that emotion with you. And you can say, I want that life, I want that life, I want that life. And then you begin to make all kinds of adjustments to have that life that doesn't give you satisfaction, doesn't fulfill you, and then you're in a spiraling problem. And you get into a downward spiral, and you get worse and worse and worse. And then life seems to have no meaning, has no hope, darkness settles in, and then we have larger and larger issues. Envy is a problem. And like anger, anger said when anger gets the best of you, it brings out the worst in you. Really, that could be true of any of the ones that we're going to be talking about today or in the weeks ahead. If any of these things get the best of you, it's going to bring out the worst in you. Aristotle said this. He defined envy as pain, personal pain, at the sight of another's good fortune, stirred by those who have what we ought to have. Think about that. That's what envy does. They have it, but you know what? I ought to have that. And that envy begins to drive deeper and deeper and deeper. Let me pause for just a second, because I think many times we think envy and jealousy are the same thing. Anybody else thought envy and jealousy are the same thing? It's a green-headed monster, right? I mean, it's the same thing. And so whether it is envy, but it's different. Here's the difference. Envy says you have what I ought to have. So the focus is on what somebody else has and you bringing that into your life. Not coveting, which is you really want something. It's like, I want what you have and I'm going to bring it into my life. That's envy. Jealousy is the opposite. I have something I don't want you to take away from me. And that's the difference. Envy says you have what I ought to have and I'm going to go get it. Jealousy says, I've got something I don't want you to have, and you better not try to come get it. And so, King Saul deals with envy today, and we're going to deal with jealousy next week because he's dealing with both things. And you can deal with both things at the same time, but don't mix them. They're different. And it's a different in where the object is. Socrates says this, envy is the ulcer of the soul. Envy is the ulcer of the... Anybody else deal with ulcers? Anybody had an ulcer yet? Okay, good. Glad you don't. They stink. But you know, envy is the cause of unhappiness. When you let envy run out of control in your life, you lose joy, you lose happiness, you lose peace, you lose a sense of security, you lose your stability, because all you can do is focus on what you don't have, what somebody else does have, and now you're just getting after that. I need that. I want that. I got to have that. And that envy is going to ruin you in the long run. And so we really need to look at how we deal with that. So, in 1 Samuel chapter 18, what we're going to see is Saul very frustrated with David. And here's the truth that I want you to understand today. Blowing out somebody else's candle doesn't make yours shine brighter. Think about that. Blowing somebody else's candle out does not make yours shine brighter. Saul is going to get so frustrated, he's going to try to blow out David's candle, but what he's going to find is it doesn't make his seem any better. It just continues to eat away at his soul. And that's what we have to be careful about. So, let's walk through this a little bit. When David had finished speaking with Saul, we're in verse 1, Jonathan was bound to David in close friendship and loved him as much as he loved himself. Saul kept David with him from that day on and did not let him return to his father's house. Now, if you go back to 17, you see the David and Goliath story. And after that, you have Saul keeping David with him. So, verse 3, Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as much as himself. Jonathan removed his robe he was wearing, gave it to David, along with his military tunic, his sword, his bow, and his belt. Now, David marched out with the army and was successful in everything Saul sent him to do. Saul put him in command of the fighting men, which pleased all the people and Saul's servant as well. So here's the deal. Saul noticed that David, the way he defeated Goliath, and he said, this is awesome. This is great. So he's going to put him in charge of some missions. And so he sends him out on missions. He sends him out. He comes back. David is successful. And man, Saul is like, man, this is awesome. This is great. We've got ourselves a warrior. This is going to be wonderful. Israel is going to be at the height of power. This is great. And as David had more and more successes, the natural thing in military life is he got promoted. He had successes and he got promoted. He had successes and he got promoted. Now it says that he put him in command of the fighting men. So he didn't have just a few and then a little bit more. Now he's in charge of the fighting men. And Saul couldn't be happier. You say, where's the envy? Just wait. How quick we can change from being happy for somebody to hating them with envy. And this is what happens. This is how quick it turns. This is how fast it goes. As the troops were coming back, when David was returning from killing the Philistine, the women came out from all the cities of Israel to meet King Saul, singing and dancing with tambourines, with shouts of joy, and with three-stringed instruments. Okay, so we've got a parade. This is a victory parade. This is David's coming back. They've had all these things, and everybody's cheering, go David, go David, go David, go David. And Saul is out there, and I mean, this is great. I mean, hey, this is awesome because what he's doing, it reflects on me, and this is going to be great. This is wonderful, and I just love what's going on. And his pride was rising, but it's going to fall. This is what happens. Because there's some envy there that may have been under the surface that now is spilling out. David killed Goliath. You know where Saul was when he did that? Shaking his boots in his tent. He and all of Israel were scared. David wasn't. So Saul can put on a good face and say, well done. That is awesome. Now go out on some missions and see what happens. Well, success continues to follow him, and Saul is now starting to struggle. This is great, this is awesome, I know, this is wonderful, until hear what the people say. Saul has killed his thousands. Saul's like, yeah, I have. That's right. I have killed my thousands. You know it? That's great, that's awesome. Yeah, yay me, this is great. Keep feeding me that. He had a problem, as many who come into power can have a problem. And he wanted this ego fed, and then what did they say? But David, his tens of thousands. Whoa, huh? Wait, go back. Saul has killed his thousands. Yes, stop right there. But David is tens of thousands. No. Look, what does it say? Saul was furious. Why? Didn't David's victories look good for him? Didn't David's victories help him in his position as king? It did, except that Saul let envy get out of control. And as envy was getting out of control, he couldn't even rejoice when it was reflecting good on him. Who chose David to go on the mission? Saul did. Who chose David to be promoted? Saul did. Who put David in charge of the fighting men? Saul did. Who let David? Who let David go out? Saul did. But Saul got envious, and it settled in his heart, and now he couldn't even be happy on a happy day. Why? Because envy robs you of joy and happiness and peace and stability and security. All those things gone, seemingly in one little phrase. Saul has killed his thousands. Hey, David, you're great too. Saul would be like, yeah, that's awesome. But that's not what they said. They were simply either overpraising David in their celebration, or the reality simply is this, that David was just better at it. And if there's anything that a middle-aged man has trouble with, is when a snot-nosed teenager does it better than he does. I mean, come on, guys, right? I mean, it's Father's Day. We get it. You know? We're a year older than it was the last time we rolled around. And the 20-somethings are able to do it better. And we're like, I don't know. No, stop talking. It's what we deal with. Saul was not doing it well. And if we're not careful, we don't do it well either. And we can run into this. But it's not just us guys, it's everybody dealing with this. So he was furious and resented the song. They credited tens of thousands to David. He complained, but they only credited me with thousands. What more can he have but the kingdom? He's just spiraling now. This is what happens. We spiral. Saul wanted what David had, but he couldn't get it. He couldn't get it. See, the desire to have what others have is what develops envy within us. I want what you have. And I hate it that you have it and I don't. That's the evil backside to envy. I mean, we could probably rationalize envy away, right? Well, sure, I want what they have. You know, that's great that they have it. And what we say may sound right. But what we say in our heart is what God really hears. We can say, man, that's great. But if in our heart we're like, man, why them? Well, now we have a struggle. We have a problem that we have to deal with. And we must deal with it. Otherwise, we can end up on a negative downward spiral, out of control envy problem that can cause you to do things you never thought you would have done before. I mean, why in the world would Saul have thrown a spear at David, who was playing the music to relieve Saul of his problem? I mean, that's what David was doing. When you go and read the context, Saul had either he had a migraine or he had some other mental instabilities, whatever it may be. David would come in, he'd play music, it would soothe, it would calm Saul, and he'd be fine. But in the midst of that, Saul had a spear in his hand. And in the midst of the calming down, I could just imagine he's sitting there looking at David and looking at David. Man, tens of thousands, huh? Man, if I just get one dead. He grips that spear harder and harder. Man, tens of thousands, really? Really? Is that what they only think of me as 1,000? They think of him as tens of thousands? What kind of people are these? What kind of person is that? And he grips and he grips and he raises it and he throws it at David. His son's best friend, who's there to help him. And all he can focus on is this envy out of control. Proverbs 14:30. I just want to read a couple of scriptures this morning. Proverbs 14:30 tells us this. A tranquil heart is life to the body, but jealousy or envy is rottenness to the bones. Envy and jealousy, these two things are just going to hurt you. They're not going to hurt other people. They're going to hurt you. Now, the problem is out of control. It's going to hurt others too. Just like we've talked about with the whole Instapot pressure cooker analogy. If you don't take care, you're going to get burned and you're going to burn everybody else around you. And that's the problem when envy gets out of control. Proverbs 24:1 says that the earth and everything in it is the Lord's. Or is that Psalm? I'm sorry, maybe Psalm 24:1. My bad. Psalm 24:1. The earth and everything in it, the world and its inhabitants belong to the Lord. For he laid its foundation on the seas and established it on the rivers. See, the problem with envy is this. You think there's only X amount of things available out in the world. And you think that if that person has it, it means I can't have it. And what we begin to think is God's not big enough to provide us both with the same thing. God must not like me. God must like them better. Okay, what did they do better than me? So if I just take them out of the picture, then maybe God will love me more. And you're like, I would never think that. I'm sure Saul never thought he'd kill his son's best friend or attempt to do so either. And yet, when envy's out of control, this is where we find ourselves. Is that we start thinking, and envy creates this pattern in us to start thinking, there's not enough to go around, so I got to get mine. And if that means somebody else can't get theirs, too bad. When the reality is there's enough to go around. We have to learn to live with the way God's dealing with us, and it's different than he may be dealing with somebody else. And recognize that neither one may be right or wrong, and God doesn't love one more than another. It's simply that envy creates in us this scarcity mentality that says, oh man, there's only so much, and if they get it, oh my goodness, I can't have it. Why? Maybe God doesn't want you to have that because he knows how you'll take it. Or maybe there's a whole other reason that has nothing to do with why they have it and you don't. But when we begin to compare and we say, wow, my life would be so much better if I just had that. Man, if I could just get that. Boy, I don't know why they have it. And what happens is we begin to compare. And what happens when you compare? What you're actually saying is, God, you really stink at your job. Because I don't have that and they do. And boy, I live a better life than they do. Why don't you bless me the way you're blessing them? We begin to question. This is what envy does. Is it causes me to question the goodness of God. Because we focus on what somebody has and I don't have, rather than being thankful for what I do have because of God. And that is such a critical shift in thinking. What could Saul have done? Well, let's look at what Saul could have done. He could have been thankful. He could have been thankful. God, thank you for giving me such a tremendous warrior for our kingdom so that we can continue to protect ourselves. God, thank you for David. That's not what he said, was it? Ultimately, he's like, really? I thought I was king. So the only thing left is for him to have the kingdom. And you see him just going deep into this negativity. He could have been thankful. We could be thankful. We could say, God, you know, I really want that, but I'm going to stop short. God, I want to be thankful for what I do have. God, thank you for the house I have. Thank you for the family I have, not the family I think I want. Thank you for the car I have, not the car I think I want. God, thank you for the community I have, not the community I think I want. God, thank you for the job I have, not the job I think I should have. God, thank you for, and you fill in the blank. Learning to be thankful is incredibly important because it battles against this envy comparison nightmare that we fall into. Learning to say thank you over and over and over again. And sometimes you may have to get up saying thank you, and you may have to say thank you all day long till you go down because you're in a battle and you're in a fight. And you can't see through what you're in. But if we could start to say thank you, it begins to shift our thinking, and it begins to change our mentality away from a comparison to everything else out there and simply to a moment of relationship with God. God, I don't understand, but I want to be thankful for what I do have, for you have provided me with what I need. So God, thank you. Thank you for that. And you know what? For a little bit, let's be honest, for a little bit, you may have to do it through gritted teeth until we learn the practice of gratitude. Until we learn to be thankful. This battles envy. Head to head, we'll battle envy every time. When something comes up, oh, I wish I had. Stop. God, I'm thankful for what I have. I'm thankful for what I have. I'm thankful for what I'm have. I'm thankful for what I got. I think, and you just have to say it over and over because sometimes it's convincing yourself. And that's the biggest enemy sometimes, is ourselves. Being content is something he could have done. To realize God's working in everybody's life at a different pace and wherever they are. Every one of us in this room and online, we're at a different spot in the journey. No two people are the same. And we're at different spots in this journey, and God, in His grace, comes to each of us where we are and wants to move you a step further down the road. And so if we can learn to be content and say, you know what, boy, I really wish what they had. Why? You don't know what's going on in their life. You don't know what's going on behind the closed doors. You don't know what's going on between the posts of that so-called life you think you wish you had. Learning to be content. I have what I have by the grace of God. God, help me to be content with that. Not that we can't have a sense of ambition, not that we can't have goals, but not to let envy win the day. But to say, God, I don't want envy in my life. I see the negative effects of that. So I want to be thankful. I'm going to name everything. Don't blanket this thing. God, thank you for the blessings of my day. That's the dinner prayer, okay? That's what you pray at dinner because you're ready to eat, okay? This is what we do, okay? But in your time that you spend with God, when you're driving down the road, when you're staring out the window, wishing you had something else that you don't have, we need to name them, every one of them. God, I thank you for this, and this, and this, and this, and this. Stop blanketing it. Start naming it. God, I thank you for all of these things. Write them down. Repeat it every day if you have to, until gratitude and the ability to be content with where you are, knowing God's at work and wants to move you forward. Wait on His timing. His movement in your life will lead you far better than our movement of our lives. And finally, be present. He could have been present, and he wasn't present. What do you mean by being present? They were singing and dancing and celebrating a win that David had. And whether they exaggerated or not, Saul could have simply been present in the moment and said, way to go, David, that's awesome. Now, he could also have sarcastically clapped. It's not what I'm talking about. Be present. Romans 12:13 says this, to weep with those who weep and to rejoice with those who rejoice. Be present in their life. If somebody's rejoicing, rejoice with them. Envy wants to step in and have you not rejoice with them. Envy wants you to step in and go, man, I hate that for them. Why don't I have that? Why does it seem like if it weren't for bad luck, I'd have no luck at all? Envy wants you to say, oh, are you hurting? Serves you right. That's what envy does. No, be present. Weep with those who, if they're hurting because they lost something that they treasured and cherished, don't secretly rejoice because now you're back on even playing. No, weep with those who weep. That's Christian family. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Be present. Be thankful. Be content. Be present. This is what Saul could have done. This is how we fight envy. Practical, every day. Get after it. Get on it. Do it. Thankfulness, contentment, and presence will beat envy in your life. Don't let it run your day. Don't let it rule your heart, because it leads to so many negative things you don't want. And if you continue reading in King Saul's life, he was never happy. He was never joyful. He tried killing David. He attempted to do all kinds of things that you can easily see aren't good. And it started because envy and anger and jealousy and fear and bitterness all began to rise up and get out of control, and he never fought back. Fight back. In just a moment, we're going to have a moment of reflection, a time for you to think about what God's leading you to think about, to take a moment to pray with Him, to consider what God is speaking to you in these moments. And whether you sing with the band or you continue to just think and contemplate, regardless of what, take this moment to reflect on what God's Word is sharing with us and how we can take steps of faith to move forward.